Picture a world on the brink of annihilation, a sky torn by fire, the earth trembling beneath the weight of clashing gods and monsters. This is Ragnarök, the cataclysmic end foretold in Norse mythology, where even the mightiest deities face their doom. And at the heart of this chaos stands Surtr, a towering figure wreathed in flames, his very presence signaling the end of all things. His name alone stirs dread, for he is the fire giant destined to reduce the cosmos to ashes. But who is this fearsome being? Where did he come from? And why does his role in the Norse myths carry such terrifying significance? Surtr isn't just another monster lurking in the shadows of legend. He is an elemental force, a primordial entity older than many of the gods themselves, waiting in the smoldering depths of Muspelheim, the realm of fire. While Odin and Thor prepare for their final battle, Surtr bides his time, sharpening his blazing sword, a weapon said to outshine the sun itself. When the time comes, he will march across the rainbow bridge Bifrost, shattering it beneath his steps, and unleash a firestorm so vast it consumes the world. But here's the twist: Surtr isn't merely a mindless destroyer. His actions are tied to the very fabric of Norse cosmology, a cycle of creation and destruction that even the gods cannot escape. What makes Surtr so fascinating isn't just his apocalyptic role, it's the mystery that surrounds him. Unlike other giants who clash with the gods out of spite or vengeance, Surtr seems almost indifferent, a force of nature carrying out an inevitable duty. Is he evil, or is he simply fulfilling a destiny written into the universe itself? And what does his story reveal about the Norse understanding of fate, rebirth, and the balance between order and chaos? These are the questions we'll explore as we delve into the legend of Surtr, peeling back the layers of myth to uncover the truths hidden within the flames. So join me as we step into the world of the Vikings, where fire and fate collide, and where even the end of the world is just the beginning of another story. Long before the first gods drew breath, before Yggdrasil's roots reached deep into the earth, Surtr already stood watch in the blazing wastes of Muspelheim. This realm of eternal flame isn't just his home, it's part of him, as inseparable as shadow from light. Unlike the frost giants of Niflheim, born from the primordial void of Ginnungagap, Surtr is fire given form, a living manifestation of the chaos that existed before creation. His name, meaning the Black One or the Swarthy, hints at the scorched devastation left in his wake, but also at something far older, a darkness that predates even the concept of night. Norse mythology often paints the cosmos as a cycle of order and chaos, with the gods maintaining balance against forces that seek to unravel it, but Surtr defies this duality. He isn't merely an adversary, he's a constant, as inevitable as the setting sun. While later myths frame him as a villain of Ragnarök, earlier traditions suggest he was never truly an enemy of the gods, just a force they could neither control nor escape. Think of him like a wildfire, destructive, yes, but also a natural part of the world's rhythm, clearing the way for new growth. What's striking is how little the myths say about Surtr's motives. Unlike Loki, who schemes and laughs, or the frost giants who hunger for war, Surtr acts with a terrifying indifference. He doesn't rage against the gods, he simply outlasts them. His sword, brighter than any star, isn't a tool of conquest but an instrument of fate. When he finally marches at Ragnarök, he doesn't gloat or hesitate. He fulfills his purpose, reducing the world to embers so that something new can rise from the ashes. This is what makes him so haunting. Surtr isn't just a monster, he's a reminder that even the gods are temporary. In a universe where everything, even divine power, has an expiration date, he is the unflinching hand that turns the hourglass. The Norse didn't fear him because he was evil, but because he was undeniable. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying power of all. Muspelheim isn't just another realm in Norse mythology. It's a searing, living nightmare of flame and molten rock, a place where the air itself crackles with heat and the ground glows like a forge. Imagine standing at the edge of a world where rivers flow with fire instead of water, where mountains are heaps of smoldering coals and the sky is an endless curtain of swirling embers. This is Surtr's kingdom, a land so hostile that most beings would turn to ash in seconds. But for the fire giant, its home, Muspelheim stands in stark contrast to Niflheim, the frozen wasteland of mist and ice that existed at the dawn of creation. Where Niflheim is silent and still, Muspelheim roars with unending fury. These two realms emerged from the void of Ginnungagap, their collision of fire and ice giving birth to the first life in Norse myth, Ymir, the primordial giant. But while Niflheim's frost giants are chaotic and unpredictable, Muspelheim's fire giants, led by Surtr, embody a different kind of power, relentless, all-consuming, and inevitable. This fiery realm doesn't just house Surtr, it defines him. Every flame that licks at the jagged landscape, every wave of molten rock is an extension of his being. His strength doesn't come from trickery or magic like Loki's, but from the raw, untamed energy of Muspelheim itself. When Ragnarök arrives, it's not just Surtr who marches to war, it's his entire realm, an army of flames riding the winds of destruction. The heat of his homeland fuels his sword, a weapon said to blaze so fiercely it could melt the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. What's fascinating is how Muspelheim represents more than just destruction. In Norse cosmology, fire isn't purely an agent of doom, it's a necessary force, a catalyst for rebirth. Just as a forest fire clears the way for new growth, Surtr's flames don't just end the world, they make room for the next one. The Poetic Edda describes how, after the conflagration, the earth will rise again, fresh and green from the sea. Muspelheim, then, isn't just a place of endings, it's part of a cycle, a reminder that even annihilation has purpose. This duality is key to understanding Surtr's role. He isn't merely a villain lurking in the shadows, he's a fundamental force, as essential to the cosmos as Odin's wisdom or Thor's strength. Without him, the cycle of creation and destruction would be broken. The Vikings understood this balance. Their world wasn't just one of order versus chaos, but of forces that needed each other to exist. Surtr, in all his terrifying might, isn't just the end of things. He's the spark that sets the next beginning into motion. Standing taller than the mightiest mountains, Surtr cuts a silhouette of sheer terror, a figure so immense his shadow alone could smother entire lands. His body is not merely covered in flames, he is fire itself, a living inferno with skin like charred obsidian cracked open to reveal rivers of molten rock beneath. Every breath he takes scorches the air, turning it to shimmering heat haze, and his eyes burn with a light so intense it pierces through smoke and darkness alike. But the most horrifying detail isn't his size or his flames. It's the sword he carries, a weapon forged in the heart of Muspelheim, its blade radiating heat so fierce it's said to melt the shields of gods before they even raise them in defense. Ancient Norse texts paint Surtr's appearance with deliberate, nightmarish strokes. The Poetic Edda describes him as the Shining One, a chilling paradox. His beauty is the beauty of a wildfire, mesmerizing and lethal. Viking skalds didn't just see him as a giant, they envisioned a force of nature, a walking cataclysm. Even his voice, when rarely mentioned, is compared to the rumble of collapsing volcanoes, a sound that shakes the bones of those who hear it. Unlike other giants who might wear armor or wield crude weapons, Surtr's power is innate, his very presence a weapon. Modern interpretations have only amplified this terror. Artists often depict him with a crown of twisting flames, his skeletal features half visible beneath the fire, merging the imagery of a demon and a primal deity. Fantasy literature and games frequently cast him as the ultimate, final boss, a being so powerful that defeating him isn't about strength but survival. Yet what's striking is how consistently these portrayals return to one theme. Surtr isn't just large or strong, he's inevitable. his flames don't flicker, they consume. His sword doesn't waver, it cleaves. Even the gods, for all their power, seem dwarfed by him. In surviving artwork, Odin and Thor are often shown straining against his advance, their divine might barely holding back the inferno. This isn't just a battle of strength, it's a confrontation with destiny itself. The flames that wreathe Surtr aren't just for show, they're a promise, a visual echo of the prophecy that he will one day reduce the world to cinders. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of his appearance. Every flicker of fire, every glow of his sword, is a countdown to the end of all things. What makes Surtr's visage so unforgettable isn't just the scale of his destruction, but the eerie elegance of it. He isn't a mindless brute, he's a sovereign of ruin, a king whose crown is made of the very flames that will herald Ragnarök. When you look at Surtr, you're not just seeing a monster, you're seeing the end of the world walking toward you, one smoldering step at a time. Among all the weapons in Norse mythology, none inspire as much dread as Surtr's sword, a blade so radiant it outshines the sun, so deadly it can split the earth. This isn't just a tool of war, it's an extension of the fire giant's will, a manifestation of the chaos he represents. The Poetic Edda describes it simply as that which shines brighter than the sun, but that understatement belies its terrifying power. When Surtr raises it at Ragnarök, the sword doesn't just cut, it unmakes, its flames devouring everything in their path like a wildfire with no end. What makes this weapon unique isn't just its destructive capability, but its symbolism. In a mythology filled with enchanted artifacts, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Surtr's sword stands apart. Those weapons serve their wielders, but the sword seems almost to wield Surtr, as if it's the true force behind the apocalypse. Unlike other legendary blades, it wasn't forged by dwarves or gifted by gods. It was born from Muspelheim itself, tempered in the realm's eternal fires, making it as ancient and primordial as Surtr. This connection to the land of fire suggests the sword isn't just a weapon, it's a piece of the cosmos, a fragment of the raw energy that existed before creation. The sword's role in Ragnarök is both literal and poetic. When Surtr finally marches, he doesn't swing it with the fury of a warrior, but with the inevitability of a force of nature. Its flames don't just kill, they erase, reducing the great halls of the gods to ash and boiling the oceans dry. Some interpretations suggest the sword's fire is so intense it even melts the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, severing the ties that hold the 9 realms together. Yet there's a cruel irony here. Fire in Norse mythology isn't just destruction, it's purification. Just as wildfires clear dead wood to make way for new growth, Surtr's sword doesn't just end the world, it prepares the ground for the next one. What's haunting is how little agency Surtr seems to have over the sword. He doesn't command it, he carries it as if it's his duty rather than his choice. This shifts the narrative from a simple battle between good and evil to something far more profound. A cosmic reset button wielded by a being bound to a fate he didn't choose. The sword isn't just a weapon, it's a reminder that even the mightiest forces in the universe must bow to cycles older than time itself. When the last flames of Ragnarök fade, all that will remain is Surtr's sword, glowing in the ashes, waiting for the next world to burn. The words of the Völva, the seeress in the Poetic Edda, echo with chilling certainty when she speaks of Surtr. In Völuspá, the most famous prophecy of Ragnarök, her vision unfolds like a scroll written in flame. Surtr moves from the south with the scourge of branches, she declares, a deceptively simple line that crackles with hidden meaning. Those branches aren't mere twigs, they're metaphors for his blazing sword, its flames licking like wildfire through a forest. The south in Norse cosmology isn't just a direction, it's Muspelheim itself, the furnace from which he emerges to fulfill his grim destiny. What's haunting about these passages is how little room they leave for doubt. The Völva doesn't say Surtr might come, she states it as fact, as inevitable as winter following autumn. When she describes him advancing with the ruin of gods, the Old Norse word used, fjörvi, doesn't just mean death. It implies the utter annihilation of one's essence, the complete erasure of what makes a god a god. This isn't a battle where the wounded limp away, it's total cosmic reset. Later stanzas reveal even darker layers. As Surtr's flames engulf the world, the Völva speaks of the sun turning black, the earth sinking into the sea, apocalyptic imagery so vivid it's seared into Norse cultural memory. But here's where the poetry becomes genius. Embedded in these terrifying visions is a quiet suggestion of renewal. After Surtr's fires cool, the Völva sees a new earth rising from the deep green once more. The giant's destruction isn't an end, but a necessary step in the cycle. Scholars have pored over these lines for centuries, debating their nuances. Some argue the description of Surtr fighting the guardian of the gods refers to his clash with Freyr, who ironically once gave away his magic sword, a decision that now dooms him. Others see deeper symbolism in how Surtr's flames don't just kill, they purify, burning away the old world's corruption so something uncorrupted can take its place. The most striking thing about these prophecies is their matter-of-fact tone. The Völva doesn't weep or rage against Surtr's coming. She reports it like a weather pattern, something as natural as thunder following lightning. This wasn't just storytelling, it was comfort. By framing destruction as part of a recurring cycle, the Vikings could face annihilation without despair. In Surtr's flames, they saw not just endings, but the embers of new beginnings. When Snorri Sturluson set ink to parchment in 13th century Iceland, he wasn't just recording myths, he was reshaping them. His prose Edda, a cornerstone of Norse literature, offers a detailed but distinctly altered portrait of Surtr compared to the older Poetic Edda, where the ancient verses paint the fire giant as an almost impersonal force of nature. Snorri's account sharpens him into something closer to a biblical agent of doom, a figure infused with moral weight that earlier sources never implied. One glaring difference lies in how Snorri frames Surtr's role at Ragnarök. In the Poetic Edda, the giant's actions feel inevitable, a cosmic reset written into the fabric of existence. But Snorri, writing under the shadow of Christianity, introduces hints of divine judgment. He describes Surtr's flames not just as destruction, but as purification, a concept steeped in Christian eschatology where fire cleanses sin before the world's renewal. This subtle shift reframes Surtr from a neutral force to something more aligned with figures like the Archangel Michael, wielding fire as both weapon and holy verdict. Snorri also embellishes Surtr's physicality in ways the older texts avoid. The prose Edda lingers on the spectacle of his advance, depicting him flinging fire over the earth with almost cinematic vividness. These added details serve a purpose. They make Surtr more tangible, more villainous, fitting the medieval Christian lens that often conflated pagan giants with demonic forces. Where the Poetic Edda might describe his sword simply as bright, Snorri calls it the bane of the gods, injecting a moral stakes the original myths never emphasized. Yet for all these changes, Snorri couldn't or didn't want to erase the core paradox of Surtr. Even in his Christianized retelling, the fire giant remains ambiguously necessary. His flames still pave the way for a reborn world, a cycle that defies the linear end times of Christian theology. This tension reveals Snorri's delicate balancing act, honoring his pagan heritage while making it palatable for a post-conversion audience. The result is a Surtr who walks the line between Norse fatalism and Christian morality, a hybrid creature of two worlds. What's lost, though, is the raw, elemental terror of the original. The Poetic Edda's Surtr feels like a natural disaster, awesome, indifferent. Snorri's version leans into spectacle, his flames becoming a divine pyre rather than an inevitable tide. This shift reflects broader changes in how medieval Iceland viewed its myths, no longer as living beliefs, but as stories to be preserved even if reshaped by new faith. The irony is that Snorri's adaptations may have saved Surtr's legend from oblivion. By dressing him in terms his Christian audience could understand, he ensured the fire giant's survival in the cultural imagination. Today, when we picture Surtr, his sword raised, his flames towering, we're seeing him through Snorri's eyes as much as the Vikings. And that duality, perhaps, is the real legacy of the prose Edda. A Surtr who burns twice as bright, straddling the line between pagan past and medieval present. Ragnarök isn't just a battle, it's the unraveling of creation itself, and Surtr strides onto that stage not as a mere participant, but as the conductor of the final act. While gods and giants clash in desperate combat, his role is singular, to ensure nothing survives. The myths describe him advancing from Muspelheim like a living wildfire, his legions of fire giants spreading flames so vast they melt the very foundations of the cosmos. But his most infamous moment comes when he faces Freyr, the god of fertility and sunshine, a confrontation dripping with tragic irony. Freyr, who once gave away his enchanted sword as a token of love, now stands defenseless before Surtr's blazing weapon. The imagery is stark, light against light, one god's generosity turned into his downfall, while the fire giant's merciless flames consume the battlefield. This isn't random brutality. Surtr's clash with Freyr symbolizes the collapse of natural order, fertility devoured by fire, growth suffocated under ash. Unlike Thor's dramatic duel with the serpent Jörmungandr or Odin's fatal encounter with Fenrir, Surtr's victory feels less like a battle and more like an execution. He doesn't revel in the kill, he simply completes what was foretold, and then comes his crescendo, raising his sword not just against the gods but against the world itself. The flames that leap from his blade don't discriminate. They swallow Asgard's golden halls, scorch Midgard's forests, and boil the oceans until the earth itself cracks open. What's chilling is the methodical precision of his destruction. Surtr doesn't rage or gloat. He acts with the inevitability of a wildfire spreading across dry grass, a force so natural it's beyond morality. The myths hint that even the gods in their final moments understand this. They fight not to stop him knowing they can't, but to fulfill their own destinies. In that way, Surtr becomes the great equalizer, reducing all things, divine or mortal, to the same smoldering ruin. Yet there's a haunting beauty in his final act. As the flames die down, the prophecies whisper of a new world rising from the sea, fresh and green. Surtr's fire doesn't just destroy, it purges, clearing the way for what comes next. His role isn't merely to end, it's to reset, and that's the paradox of Ragnarök. The being who embodies annihilation is also the unwitting midwife of rebirth. The Vikings didn't see this as a tragedy, but as a cycle as natural as the seasons. Surtr, in all his terrifying grandeur, isn't the villain of the story. He's the spark in the darkness, the one who makes sure the world ends not with a whimper, but with a roar. The duel between Surtr and Freyr isn't just another clash in the chaos of Ragnarök. It's a moment steeped in heartbreaking irony, a collision of fate and sacrifice that reveals the cruel poetry of Norse mythology. Freyr, the radiant god of fertility, sunshine, and bountiful harvests, stands as one of the most beloved figures in the pantheon. His very presence brings warmth to the fields and joy to the hearts of mortals. Yet when Ragnarök dawns, this gentle god faces Surtr not as an equal, but as a doomed man walking toward his execution. The reason? A single, fateful decision years earlier. Freyr gave away his sword. This wasn't just any weapon. Freyr's sword was enchanted, capable of fighting on its own, a divine artifact that would have been his greatest defense against the fire giant. But in a moment of love, or perhaps arrogance, he gifted it to his servant Skirnir as payment for winning the hand of the giantess Njörður. At the time, it might have seemed a fair trade. What use does a god of peace have for a weapon, after all? Yet this act of generosity becomes his undoing. When Surtr strides onto the battlefield, Freyr has nothing but a stag's antler to wield against a blade forged in the heart of Muspelheim. The outcome is as inevitable as it is tragic. Symbolically, this confrontation is layered with meaning. Freyr represents life, growth, and the nurturing forces of the world. Surtr embodies their opposite, annihilation, the scorched earth where nothing grows. Their duel isn't just a fight, it's the moment summer meets wildfire. The gods' prophecies foretold this loss, but that doesn't soften the blow. There's a quiet horror in watching Freyr, who once made the crops flourish, now standing helpless as Surtr's flames devour the very earth he cherished. What makes this clash so poignant is how it underscores the Norse worldview, a universe where even kindness can have unintended consequences. Freyr's decision to relinquish his sword wasn't foolish, it was human. Yet in the unforgiving logic of myth, every choice has a price. His sacrifice for love becomes the crack in the god's defenses, the weak link that allows Surtr's flames to spread unchecked. But there's another layer here. Freyr's defeat isn't just about his personal fate, it's a metaphor for the fragility of life itself. In Norse cosmology, fertility and destruction exist in a delicate balance. Surtr's victory isn't just over a god, it's over the idea of renewal, a temporary extinguishing of light so that it can someday return. The myths tell us that after Ragnarök, a new world will emerge, green and vibrant once more. Freyr's death, then, isn't an end but a necessary pause in an endless cycle. His fall ensures that one day the fields will bloom again. This duality is what makes the story of Freyr and Surtr so enduring. It's not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a meditation on how even the brightest forces must sometimes yield to darkness, and how, in doing so, they plant the seeds for their own rebirth. When Surtr's flames consume Freyr, they don't just destroy him, they set the stage for everything that comes after. The god of fertility dies, but the promise of fertility lives on, waiting for its turn to rise from the ashes. The moment Surtr raises his sword, the world holds its breath, not with a scream, but with a terrible, crackling silence, the kind that comes before a storm that will rewrite the land. His blade doesn't just cut, it unravels. Flames surge forth like a tide, not the flickering orange of campfires, but a blinding white-blue inferno that devours the sky itself. The earth doesn't burn, it dissolves. Trees, mountains, even the gods' great halls all crumble into embers that rise like 1,000 dying stars. The oceans don't boil away, they explode into towers of steam, leaving behind salt-cracked plains that glow like forge beds. This isn't destruction, it's erasure, but here's the paradox woven into the very fabric of Norse belief. Annihilation isn't the end, it's a cleansing. The same flames that reduce Yggdrasil's roots to cinder also purge the rot festering in its branches. The prophecies speak of Surtr's fire as both judge and midwife. It doesn't merely kill the old world, it prepares the new one. Think of it like a field left fallow after harvest, the scorched earth not barren but resting, gathering strength for what will grow next. The Vikings understood this better than most. Their lives were ruled by cycles, winter's freeze giving way to spring's thaw, night surrendering to dawn. Surtr's conflagration was just another turn of the wheel. The imagery in the Poetic Edda is startlingly precise. After Surtr's flames cool, the sagas describe a world reborn, fresh soil rising from the sea, green and untouched, as if the gods themselves had pressed a reset button. Even the sun, swallowed by darkness during Ragnarök, is said to return, carried by a daughter of the old sun before it fell. This cyclical vision sets Norse mythology apart from other doomsday myths. Christianity's apocalypse is final, the world ends and the saved ascend. But for the Vikings, Ragnarök wasn't an ending, it was a transition. Surtr's role in this cycle is chillingly impersonal. He doesn't gloat over the ruins or mourn them. He simply is, like a blizzard or a tidal wave. That indifference is what makes him so terrifying and so fascinating. He's not a villain twirling his mustache. He's the embodiment of an idea the Vikings lived with daily, that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. A farmer burns last year's stubble to fertilize next year's crop. A blacksmith melts ore to forge a sword. Surtr isn't some alien monstrosity. He's the cosmic version of something every Viking understood: fire's dual nature, both killer and creator. And so, when the last flames die and the smoke clears, what's left isn't just emptiness, it's potential. The saga's whisper of two human survivors, Lif and Lithrasir, hiding in the World Tree's sacred wood. They emerge not into a wasteland, but a blank canvas ready to repaint the world. Surtr's fire didn't just destroy, it made space. That's the ultimate lesson of his final act. Even the most devastating endings carry the seeds of beginnings. The Vikings didn't fear Ragnarök because they knew after the fire, after the silence, the world would take its first breath again. To the Vikings, fate wasn't just an idea, it was the invisible thread woven into every life, godly or mortal. They called it weird, a force as unyielding as the tides, and no one, not even Odin with all his wisdom, could escape its pull. This is where Surtr's true power lies. He isn't just a bringer of destruction, he's the living embodiment of weird's cruelest truth. Some endings cannot be bargained with, only faced. The Norse saw fate as a tapestry, its threads spun by the Norns at the foot of Yggdrasil. These shadowy weavers didn't just predict the future, they shaped it, their hands guiding every triumph and tragedy. When the gods learned of Ragnarök, they didn't dismiss it as a possibility. They prepared, knowing resistance was futile. Odin gathered warriors in Valhalla, Thor hunted serpents, but none dared dream they could stop what was coming. Surtr, in this context, isn't an enemy to defeat. He's the clock striking midnight, the hourglass running empty. His flames don't rage, they fulfill. This resignation to destiny might seem bleak to modern eyes, but to the Vikings it was a source of strange comfort. If even the gods couldn't cheat fate, then mortal struggles weren't failures, they were part of a grander design. Surtr's inevitability didn't make life meaningless, it made courage more precious. A farmer planting crops he might never harvest, a warrior facing a battle he can't win, these acts weren't foolish. They were defiant, a way to meet weird with head held high. Surtr's role in this cosmic drama reveals the Norse mindset in its rawest form. He doesn't gloat because he doesn't need to. His victory was written long before he lifted his sword. The chilling beauty of this belief is how it strips away illusions of control. Modern stories love underdogs who defy the odds, but Norse myth offers no such fantasies. Surtr doesn't fall because he can't fall, not out of strength, but because the universe itself demands his fire. Yet there's a paradox here. If fate is unchangeable, why do the gods fight at all? Why does Odin ride to battle knowing Fenrir will kill him? The answer lies in the difference between surrender and acceptance. The Norse didn't see resignation as weakness, they saw it as clarity. To struggle against weird was as pointless as cursing the wind, but to face it with purpose, that was dignity. Surtr isn't just destruction, he's the mirror that forces gods and mortals alike to confront the truth. Some fires can't be quenched, only endured. This is why Surtr lingers in the imagination long after other myths fade. He's not a villain to hate, but a force to respect. In a world obsessed with rewriting endings, he stands as a reminder that some stories must burn before new ones can begin. The Vikings didn't fear him because he was evil. They feared him because he was right, and in that acknowledgement they found a kind of freedom. After all, if the end is certain, all that's left is to live well until it comes. Surtr's flames aren't just a weapon, they're a language, a visual code etched into Norse mythology to convey ideas too vast for words alone. Fire, in his hands, becomes more than destruction. It's a metaphor for the chaos that both threatens and sustains the cosmos. Unlike the Christian Satan, a figure of pure malevolence tempting souls toward sin, Surtr operates without malice. His fire doesn't corrupt, it consumes, indifferent as a storm. This distinction is crucial. Satan rebels against divine order, but Surtr is order, the kind that demands cycles of endings and beginnings. The Hindus understood this duality in their god Agni, the sacred flame who devours offerings to carry them to the gods. Like Surtr, Agni embodies fire's paradox, a force that destroys, yes, but also purifies and transforms. Yet where Agni serves as a bridge between worlds, Surtr is the bridge burner, the one who severs ties so new ones can form. Both figures reveal how ancient cultures revered fire's dual nature, not just as an agent of death but as a catalyst for renewal. Even within Norse mythology, Surtr's symbolism stands apart. Loki, the trickster, thrives on chaos for chaos' sake, delighting in unraveling the gods' plans. But Surtr's chaos is different. It's impersonal, almost bureaucratic, a cosmic janitor sweeping away the old to make room for the new. His flames don't discriminate, they incinerate the corrupt and the righteous alike, because rebirth requires blank slates, not partial repairs. This ruthlessness isn't cruelty, it's efficiency. Modern ecology offers a surprising parallel. Just as certain ecosystems rely on wildfires to clear deadwood and stimulate new growth, Norse cosmology hinges on Surtr's flames. Without them, the world would stagnate, choked by the weight of its own history. The Vikings, living in harmony with nature's cycles, intuited this truth long before science confirmed it. Their myths suggest a radical acceptance. Destruction isn't failure, but a prerequisite for survival. What makes Surtr truly haunting is how he defies easy categorization. He's not a villain to defeat or a god to worship, he's a fact, as unavoidable as time itself. In a universe where even the gods are mortal, his fire becomes the great equalizer, reminding all beings of their temporary place in the cosmic order. That's the real lesson of Surtr. Some forces aren't meant to be conquered, only endured, and from their ashes something unexpected will always rise. To the Vikings, Surtr wasn't just a monster from a story. He was a chilling reality woven into their understanding of the world. Imagine living in a place where winter's grip could mean starvation, where fire was both life-giving warmth and a threat that could reduce your home to ashes in moments. That duality shaped how they saw Surtr, not as a simple villain, but as a force demanding both dread and an uneasy respect. The Norse didn't waste energy fearing what they couldn't change. They acknowledged Surtr's role with a grim practicality, much like sailors respect a storm even as they brace against it. Archaeology offers glimpses of this mindset. While no temples dedicated solely to Surtr have been found, his presence lingers in artifacts and carvings. At the Oseberg ship burial, intricate woodwork depicts swirling flames alongside other cosmic symbols, suggesting fire giants held a place in their ritual imagination. Rune stones occasionally bear imagery matching descriptions of Muspelheim's legions, their jagged lines evoking both destruction and purification. What's striking is how rarely these portrayals frame Surtr as something to be conquered instead. He's shown as an inevitable part of the landscape, like winter's first frost. Sagas and skaldic poetry reinforce this blend of fear and fascination. In one tale, a warrior on the brink of death invokes Surtr not as an enemy, but as a kindred spirit of unstoppable fury, his own sword burning with Surtr's anger. This wasn't worship in the traditional sense, but a recognition of shared destiny. Vikings admired strength even when it came cloaked in flames. Their concept of honor demanded facing inevitable ends with courage, and Surtr became the ultimate test of that principle, a being who couldn't be bargained with, only met with defiant acceptance. The absence of direct Surtr worship speaks volumes. Unlike Thor or Freyr, he wasn't a god to pray to for protection or favor. You didn't leave offerings to delay Ragnarök, you prepared for it both physically and spiritually. This reflects a core Viking belief: some forces aren't meant to be manipulated, only endured. Their myths are filled with heroes who know they'll die yet fight anyway, and Surtr is the cosmic embodiment of that ethos. His fire wasn't just punishment, it was the ultimate proving ground, the flame that would reveal what, if anything, could endure. Modern scholars debate whether fear or respect dominated Viking attitudes toward Surtr. The answer lies somewhere between. They feared his devastation, yes, but they also understood his necessity. Like a blacksmith who respects the forge's fury while sweating over its flames, the Vikings saw Surtr as part of a balance too vast to fully comprehend. His flames would come not out of spite, but because the world demanded them. And in that acceptance, they found a strange kind of peace, the knowledge that even the end had its purpose, and from the ashes something new would always rise. Among the many giants of Norse mythology, Surtr cuts a singular figure, not just in size but in essence. While creatures like Ymir or Thrym embody chaos, ambition, or brute strength, Surtr operates on an entirely different scale. He isn't merely a giant, he's geology given sentience, a force as indifferent and inevitable as a volcano erupting after centuries of silence. Take Ymir, the first of the frost giants, born from the mingling of fire and ice in the void of Ginnungagap. Ymir was a creator, his body forming the very fabric of the world when Odin and his brothers slew him. Yet for all his primal power, Ymir was mortal, a being who could be killed, dismantled, repurposed. Surtr, by contrast, cannot be unraveled or outmaneuvered. He is the fire that cannot be quenched, the ember that never cools. Then there are giants like Thrym, the cunning thief who stole Thor's hammer and demanded Freyr as ransom. Thrym represents the Norse archetype of the trickster giant, brash, greedy, and delighting in causing mischief. His conflicts with the gods are personal, almost petty. Surtr, though, has no interest in games or bargaining. He doesn't steal weapons or kidnap goddesses. He doesn't want anything. His role isn't to challenge the gods, but to erase them, not out of malice, but because it's written into the bones of the universe. Where Thrym's antics are laced with humor, Surtr's advance is as humorless as a wildfire. Even among the fire giants, Surtr stands apart. Most Jotnar, whether frost or flame, are portrayed as volatile, capricious beings who clash with the gods out of envy or pride. But Surtr is more like a natural law than a character. His kin might revel in destruction, but he is destruction, an elemental truth as fundamental as gravity. The difference is clearest in their fates. When Ragnarök comes, the other giants fall in battle, their deaths dramatic, their ends marked by struggle. Surtr doesn't fall, he fulfills. While Thor and Jörmungandr slay each other in mutual annihilation, Surtr outlasts them all, his flames continuing their work long after the last god has breathed their final breath. Perhaps the most telling contrast lies in their origins. Ymir and Thrym are born, live, and die like any other being, but Surtr seems to have simply always been as eternal as Muspelheim itself. The myths never speak of his creation because they don't need to. Fire doesn't require a beginning. It just is. In this way, Surtr transcends the usual roles of Norse giants. He isn't a villain to defeat or a rival to outwit. He's the closing chord of a symphony, the period at the end of a sentence. The other giants play their parts in the story. Surtr is the story's final page. What truly sets him apart, though, is the absence of personality where others overflow with it. Loki schemes, Thyrzy thirsts for power. Even Ymir, despite his primordial nature, is portrayed with almost childlike innocence before his slaughter. Surtr has no personality, no motivation beyond the purpose etched into his being. He's less a character and more a force of nature, like a hurricane or an earthquake given mythic form. The Vikings didn't fear him because he hated them. They feared him because he didn't. In Surtr's indifference lay the real terror, the understanding that the universe wouldn't even notice as it burned them all away. Yet this very lack of malice is what makes him so compelling. Surtr isn't evil, he's necessary. Without his flames, the cycle of rebirth couldn't begin anew. The other giants represent chaos, yes, but Surtr represents something far grander, the inevitability of change. the promise that even the mightiest kingdoms must one day return to dust. In a mythology obsessed with cycles, he's the pivot point, the moment the wheel turns. The other giants are actors in the drama of the gods. Surtr, he's the curtain call. The flames of Norse mythology haven't stayed confined to ancient texts. Surtr's blazing presence has erupted into modern media, his legend reshaped for comic books, video games, and blockbuster films. Marvel Comics, never one to shy away from mythic reinterpretation, introduced Surtr as a towering adversary in Thor's Rogues Gallery, but this version takes creative liberties. In Marvel's universe, Surtr isn't just a force of nature. He's a scheming conqueror with a vendetta against Asgard, wielding his sword not as an instrument of fate but as a weapon of revenge. His design leans into the monstrous horns curling like molten rock, eyes burning with personal hatred, a far cry from the indifferent cosmic entity of the myths. Yet even here, traces of his mythic roots remain. When he finally unleashes Ragnarök in the comics, it's not just about destruction. It's about resetting the cycle, echoing the Norse belief in rebirth after the flames. Then there's God of War, Ragnarök, where Surtr's role is both expanded and deeply respectful of the source material. The game reimagines him as a tragic figure, bound by prophecy but yearning for agency. His relationship with his mate, Sinmara, adds emotional layers absent in the original myth's love entwined with doom. When Kratos and Freyr seek his aid, Surtr doesn't rage. He negotiates, his voice a rumble of weary inevitability. The game's climax, where he transforms into the apocalyptic beast Ragnarök itself, is a masterclass in balancing spectacle with mythic weight. Flames engulf Asgard not out of malice but because it's his purpose. This Surtr isn't a villain, he's a prisoner of his own destiny, a nuance that would have resonated with the Vikings' fatalistic worldview. Video games like Smite and Final Fantasy take a different tack, slotting Surtr into familiar tropes, the raid boss, the endgame threat. Smite turns him into a playable character, his moveset a whirlwind of fire and brute force, while Final Fantasy Roman XIV pits players against him in a battle that's less about mythology and more about dazzling pyrotechnics. These interpretations prioritize gameplay over faithfulness, but they keep his essence intact, an unstoppable force that demands teamwork to overcome. Even in these streamlined versions, Surtr's sheer presence commands awe. But perhaps the most intriguing modern twist comes from Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, which retells the Eddas with a novelist's flair. Gaiman's Surtr is chillingly matter-of-fact, his dialogue stripped of grandeur. "I burn, it is what I do," he says, a line that distills his mythic role into haunting simplicity. Unlike Marvel or God of War, Gaiman doesn't embellish. He amplifies the original's existential dread, reminding readers that Surtr isn't a character with arcs or growth. He's a function of the universe, as impersonal as time. What unites these adaptations is their recognition of Surtr's core power. He's not just a monster, but an idea. Whether as a scheming comic book villain, a tragic game figure, or a minimalist force in literature, each version grapples with the same terrifying truth: some forces can't be bargained with. They can only be faced, and in that, modern media captures something the Vikings understood all too well. Surtr isn't here to scare us, he's here to remind us that every story, no matter how grand, has an ending. The question is what we do before the flames arrive. Surtr's role as the harbinger of Ragnarök places him in a grand tradition of apocalyptic figures across world mythology, beings whose sole purpose is to dismantle the old order so the new can rise. Take Typhon from Greek myth, a monstrous storm giant so vast his head brushed the stars. Like Surtr, Typhon wasn't just a threat to the gods, he was a cataclysm made flesh, his very breath capable of leveling mountains. Both embody the chaos that lurks at the edges of creation, forces so immense they force even deities to confront their mortality. Yet there's a key difference. Typhon was born from the god's fear, a weapon of revenge crafted by Gaia. Surtr, by contrast, predates the gods entirely. His destruction isn't personal, it's cosmic, a scheduled reckoning rather than a tantrum of the earth. Then there's Kali, the Hindu goddess of time and dissolution. Cloaked in a necklace of skulls, dancing atop the corpse of her consort Shiva, Kali's wild destruction mirrors Surtr's in its inevitability. Both figures are feared yet revered, Kali for her power to annihilate illusion, Surtr for his role in resetting the cycle of existence. But where Kali's violence is frenzied, ecstatic, Surtr's is methodical, almost mechanical. Kali destroys to reveal truth, Surtr destroys because it's written. One is the storm, the other the glacier, both unstoppable, but operating on different scales of time and intent. The Aztec Tezcatlipoca, smoking mirror, offers another fascinating parallel. A trickster god of change and conflict, he orchestrates the destruction of world ages not through brute force, but through subtle imbalance, toppling civilizations like dominoes to make way for the next. Surtr shares this cyclical purpose, but his approach couldn't be more different. Where Tezcatlipoca weaves schemes, Surtr simply marches. One is the scalpel, the other the wildfire. Yet both embody a shared understanding. Civilizations aren't meant to last forever. They're chapters in a story too vast for mortal comprehension. Even outside these direct comparisons, echoes of Surtr appear in figures like the Christian Four Horsemen or the Buddhist deity Mara, who tests souls with illusions of permanence. What unites them all is the recognition that destruction isn't an aberration, it's a necessary phase, as vital as growth or decay. The Norse didn't shy from this truth. They named it, gave it a sword and a realm, and set it in motion with chilling specificity. Surtr isn't unique in his function, but in his focus. Where other destroyers blur into metaphor or moral lessons, he remains starkly literal. Fire that burns, a sword that cleaves, an end that comes for everyone, divine or not. These cross-cultural parallels reveal something profound about human storytelling. From the icy wastes of Scandinavia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, our ancestors conjured figures like Surtr not to terrify, but to make sense of impermanence. They understood that forests need fires, fields need fallow seasons, and worlds need their Surtr's beings who remind us that even the mightiest kingdoms are sandcastles before the tide. The details change, but the lesson remains. Creation demands destruction. And whether it's Surtr's flames, Kali's dance, or Tezcatlipoca's schemes, the message is the same. Nothing lasts, and that's not tragedy, it's design. Scholars have long debated the origins of Surtr, peeling back layers of myth to uncover possible historical and geological inspirations. One compelling theory suggests he embodies the Vikings' encounters with volcanic eruptions, events so cataclysmic they could only be explained as the wrath of a primordial being. Iceland, where many Norse myths took shape, is a land shaped by fire and ice, where volcanoes like Hekla and Katla would have spewed ash and molten rock across the horizon. Imagine the terror of witnessing such an eruption. The sky blackened, rivers of flame carving through the earth, the very ground trembling. To a culture with no scientific explanation for these phenomena, Surtr might have been the only logical answer, a personification of nature's unstoppable fury. Archaeologists have found evidence of settlements buried under volcanic ash, hinting that these disasters weren't just stories but lived trauma, etched into collective memory. Another thread ties Surtr to older Indo-European myths, where fire giants or destructive deities appear as far back as the Proto-Indo-European pantheon. Parallels emerge in figures like the Vedic Agni, the Zoroastrian Angra Mainyu, or even the Slavic Svarog entities linked to fire, destruction, or cosmic renewal. Linguists point to Surtr's name, derived from the Old Norse word for black or swarthy, possibly connecting him to earlier concepts of chthonic forces or the scorched earth left behind by wildfires. Some scholars argue he's a relic of a pan-European fire god, fragmented and reshaped by Norse storytellers. Yet unlike these counterparts, Surtr lacks a cult or worship. He's not prayed to, but feared as an inevitable force, which raises questions about how his role evolved uniquely in Scandinavia. Theories also swirl around Surtr's possible roots in older creation myths. Before Ymir's body formed the world, the void of Ginnungagap brimmed with elemental opposites, Muspelheim's fire and Niflheim's ice. Surtr, as Muspelheim's sovereign, might represent a holdover from this pre-creation chaos, a remnant of the untamed forces that existed before order. Unlike later giants who interact with gods as rivals or foes, Surtr feels more like a landscape given consciousness, less a character than a personified natural law. This ties into broader Indo-European motifs of fire as both destroyer and regenerator, a duality seen in rituals where controlled burns renewed farmland. Surtr's flames, then, might reflect an ancient understanding of ecological cycles, mythologized into apocalyptic prophecy, yet for all these theories, gaps remain. Why does Surtr appear so sparingly in surviving texts compared to other giants? Was he once a more central figure whose stories were lost, or was his aloofness intentional, a narrative choice to emphasize his role as an impersonal force? Some scholars suggest his minimal backstory isn't an omission but the point. Surtr exists to fulfill a function, not to entertain with tales of schemes or loves. His mystery is his power. The debates continue, but one thing is clear: whether as volcanic terror, cosmic holdover, or ecological metaphor, Surtr's origins are as layered as the ash he leaves behind. In modern heathenry and Norse pagan revival movements, Surtr occupies a fascinating and often contradictory space, part destroyer, part necessary catalyst, his legacy reinterpreted through the lens of contemporary spirituality. Unlike the gods who receive regular offerings and prayers, Surtr rarely has dedicated altars or widespread worship, yet his presence lingers in rituals and discussions, a shadow at the edge of the firelight. Some practitioners view him with wary respect, acknowledging his role in the cycle of destruction and rebirth without actively seeking his favor. Others go further, framing him as a symbol of radical transformation, a force to invoke when old patterns need burning away to make space for growth. One striking trend is how modern heathens grapple with Surtr's indifference. Unlike Loki, who thrives on chaos and personal mischief, Surtr's destruction lacks malice. This neutrality makes him both easier and harder to reconcile. In rituals marking life transitions, career changes, the end of relationships, even societal upheavals, some invoke Surtr not as a deity to petition, but as a metaphor for the unavoidable fires that reshape lives. A heathen in Norway described holding a fire rite during a personal crisis, symbolically offering old regrets to flames while reciting verses from the Völuspá. Surtr doesn't care about your pain, they explained, but he reminds you that from ashes new things grow, yet not all interpretations are so abstract. In certain strands of left-wing heathenry, Surtr has been adopted as a revolutionary icon, his flames symbolizing the dismantling of oppressive systems. This politicized reading draws parallels between Ragnarök and social upheaval, casting Surtr as a harbinger of justice rather than mindless destruction. Conversely, some eco-spiritualists see him as an embodiment of climate change's relentless march, a warning against humanity's abuse of natural cycles. These divergent views highlight how adaptable Norse mythology remains, its symbols morphing to address modern anxieties, but reverence for Surtr isn't universal. Many Reconstructionist heathens prioritize historical accuracy, treating him as the myths do, an impersonal force to acknowledge, not engage with. Blot's sacrificial ceremonies for Surtr are exceedingly rare. When fire is incorporated into rituals, it's more often linked to deities like Logi or even the transformative aspects of Odin. This reluctance isn't just about fear. As one scholar of modern paganism notes, Surtr's power is untamable. You don't invite a wildfire to dinner. You prepare for it, you respect it, but you don't pretend you can control it. Perhaps the most poignant reinterpretations come from those who see Surtr as a mirror for personal resilience. In online heathen communities, discussions often turn to his role in Ragnarök, not as an end, but as a prelude to renewal. For followers navigating illness or grief, Surtr's flames become a stark comfort. Some losses are inevitable, but they aren't final. A cancer survivor in a California kindred described weaving Surtr's imagery into a ritual marking the end of chemotherapy. The treatment burned through me like Muspelheim's fire, they shared. But like the myths say, what comes after isn't emptiness, it's a chance to regrow. This duality, destruction as both threat and necessity, echoes the Vikings' own complex relationship with Surtr. Modern heathenry, with its emphasis on cyclical time and interconnectedness, amplifies this tension. Whether viewed as a literal being, a psychological archetype, or an ecological warning, Surtr's legacy endures not in spite of his terrifying power, but because of it. In a world that still runs on flames, both literal and metaphorical, his myth reminds us that some fires can't be escaped, only endured, and that from their ashes surprising rebirths can rise. One of the most puzzling aspects of Surtr's mythology isn't what's said about him, it's what's left unsaid. Unlike other Norse figures, whose genealogies and exploits fill sagas and poems, Surtr arrives fully formed, wielding his sword without explanation. No parents, no siblings, no stories of his early battles or loves. He simply is, emerging from Muspelheim when the prophecies demand it. This absence of backstory is striking in a tradition rich with detail, where even minor spirits get origin tales. So why does Surtr, a being central to the world's end, remain so enigmatic? The answer might lie in the very nature of his role. Consider how other giants operate in the myths. Loki's mischief stems from his mixed heritage and insecurities. Ymir's creation story explains the world's origins, but Surtr doesn't need motivation or lineage. He's not a character so much as a force. Fire doesn't require a backstory, it just burns. The Vikings may have seen Surtr the same way, an elemental truth, not a personality to dissect. His lack of familial ties reinforces this. While frost giants like Thrym boast elaborate family trees, Surtr stands alone, untethered by kinship or alliances. He isn't part of the giant social fabric because he transcends it. Another possibility is that Surtr's missing lore reflects deliberate narrative choices. The Poetic Edda and Prose Edda were compiled by poets preserving oral traditions, and they might have trimmed extraneous details to sharpen his symbolic impact. Imagine a storyteller describing Ragnarök. Too much backstory could dilute the raw terror of Surtr's march. His power lies in his lack of context. He's more ominous because we don't know his limits or weaknesses. Like a storm or earthquake, he's terrifying precisely because he operates beyond human frameworks of understanding. There's also the question of lost sources. Norse mythology survived through fragmented records, often filtered through Christian scribes like Snorri Sturluson. Could earlier tales have fleshed out Surtr's past, only to vanish when paganism faded? Some scholars point to cryptic references in lesser-known texts, like the older Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, where fire giants lurk in the shadows. These fragments hint at a broader tradition that might have once given Surtr more depth, leaving us with only echoes of what was. Yet the gaps in Surtr's mythos might serve a deeper purpose. His ambiguity allows him to embody universal fears not just of fire, but of inevitability itself. Without a backstory, he becomes a mirror for whatever existential dread a culture projects onto him. Medieval Icelanders might have seen him as a symbol of volcanic doom. Modern audiences might interpret him as climate change or nuclear winter. Surtr's power grows because he's undefined, a blank space where we see our own apocalyptic anxieties reflected. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why Surtr lacks lore, but why we expect him to have any. The god stories are full of loves, rivalries, and personal growth, but Surtr exists outside those themes. He's not here to learn or change, he's here to end, and in that role, his silence speaks louder than any saga ever could. The flames that once symbolized the end of the world in Viking sagas now flicker with eerie familiarity in our modern reality. Could Surtr, the fire giant who reduces the cosmos to ashes, be more than a myth? Could he be an ancient allegory for what we now face, the slow-motion apocalypse of climate change? The parallels are hard to ignore. Just as Surtr's flames surge unchecked across the 9 realms, our planet now burns with record wildfires, glaciers retreat like frost giants before Muspelheim's heat, and oceans rise like the floods that follow Ragnarök. The Vikings feared a prophecy written in fire. We're living one written in rising CO2 levels, but where Surtr's destruction was fate, ours is self-made. The Norse didn't believe they could stop Ragnarök, only brace for it. Yet the irony is stark. We know how to douse these flames, but instead we fan them. Deforestation, fossil fuels, industrial excess, these are our versions of Surtr's sword, tools we wield against our own world. The difference, Surtr had no malice. His flames were a natural cycle. Ours are a failing of imagination, of greed, of delay. Look deeper, though, and the myth offers more than warning. It whispers a strange hope. The Vikings understood that fire wasn't just an end, but a cleansing. After Surtr's conflagration, the earth rose anew, fertile and unspoiled. Climate change isn't destiny, it's a crossroads. We still have time to channel Surtr's lesson. Destruction can be a catalyst, but only if we choose to regrow what burns. The question isn't whether we'll face the flames. It's whether we'll let them reduce us to ash or rise from them like the green shoots of the reborn world the prophecies promised. Long before cinematic special effects or digital art, medieval scribes captured Surtr's terrifying essence with ink and vellum. One of the earliest known depictions appears in an Icelandic manuscript from the 14th century, where he looms over a scene of Ragnarök, his body a twisting column of flame sketched in meticulous hatch marks. The artist chose to render him not as a traditional giant, but as something more abstract, a swirling vortex of fire with only hints of a face peering through the inferno. This stylistic choice speaks volumes about how the Norse visualized destruction, not as a person but as an event, a force so vast it defies human form. Jump forward to the 19th century, and Surtr's image shifts dramatically with the rise of Romanticism. Painters like Johannes Jayets and Lawrence Frolick reimagined him as a towering, muscular figure, his physique echoing classical sculptures but crowned with wild, fiery hair. These depictions leaned into drama, often showing Surtr mid-stride with his sword raised high, the heavens behind him painted in apocalyptic oranges and reds. The Romantic artists infused him with a theatrical grandeur, emphasizing his role as the ultimate antagonist in the god's final stand. Yet even here, subtle details reveal deeper layers. The way his flames consume nearby frost giants indiscriminately, a visual nod to his indifference toward allies or enemies alike. Modern fantasy illustrators have taken even greater liberties, blending Norse motifs with contemporary aesthetics. Take the work of Alan Lee, whose Surtr for Tolkien-inspired editions of the Edda merges volcanic textures with jagged, almost crystalline armor. His version isn't just a monster, he's a landscape in motion, his limbs resembling molten rock cooling into obsidian. Meanwhile, video game artists like those behind God of War, Ragnarök designed Surtr as a fusion of myth and biomechanical horror, his body crackling with internal lava flows and his voice resonating like a collapsing caldera. These interpretations highlight a shift from symbolic representation to visceral, sensory immersion, Surtr as an experience, not just an idea. Perhaps the most striking evolution lies in Surtr's symbolic accessories. Medieval art rarely gave him tools beyond his sword, but modern renditions amplify his connection to Muspelheim. Some artists drape him in chains forged from burning meteors, while others encase his feet in magma shards that crystallize as he walks. A particularly haunting illustration by Swedish artist Johan Egerkrans depicts Surtr's sword not as a weapon, but as a flaming key, a literal instrument to unlock Ragnarök. These creative choices transform him from a brute into a cosmic executioner, his every detail reinforcing inevitability. Yet across all these eras, one thread remains constant: Surtr's flames are never just fire. They're a language. In medieval art, they spiral like Viking interlaced patterns, symbolizing fate's unbreakable weave. Romantic painters rendered them as violent brushstrokes, chaotic yet purposeful. Today's digital artists use particle effects to make them feel alive, each ember a pixelated herald of doom. The fire isn't just destruction, it's storytelling, a visual shorthand for the paradox at Surtr's core: the beauty of annihilation, the necessity of endings. Whether sketched in iron gall ink or rendered in Unreal Engine, his flames whisper the same truth: some forces are too vast to fight, too ancient to comprehend, and too inevitable to ignore. Surtr's shadow stretches far beyond the pages of Norse mythology, his influence igniting the imaginations of fantasy authors for generations. Few writers drew from this fiery well as deeply as J.R.R. Tolkien, whose Balrog in The Lord of the Rings bears unmistakable echoes of the primordial fire giant. Like Surtr emerging from Muspelheim, Tolkien's Balrog wakes in the darkness of Moria, wreathed in flame and shadow, a being so ancient it predates the current age. Both creatures share that same terrifying indifference, neither evil in the traditional sense, but forces of destruction so potent they transcend moral alignment. Tolkien, a scholar of Norse myths, didn't simply copy Surtr. He distilled the essence of what made him frightening: that sense of inevitability, the understanding that some forces cannot be reasoned with, only survive. The legacy doesn't stop with Middle-earth. Modern fantasy teems with Surtr's spiritual descendants, from the fire demons of Dungeons and Dragons to the apocalyptic villains of video games like Dark Souls and the Elder Scrolls. What these creatures share isn't just their flaming swords or volcanic aesthetics, it's their narrative function. They're not obstacles to overcome through cleverness or courage alone, but manifestations of a world's fundamental fragility. Take the Ifrit of Final Fantasy, whose very presence warps the landscape into molten wastelands. Like Surtr at Ragnarök, they don't just threaten lives, they threaten the stability of reality itself. Yet the most fascinating adaptations are those that twist Surtr's archetype in unexpected ways. Neil Gaiman's American Gods reimagines him as a quiet, smoldering presence in the background of a modern pantheon, while God of War, Ragnarök, gives him tragic depth, binding him to prophecy in a way that mirrors the original myths while adding new layers of pathos. These versions prove Surtr's versatility. He isn't just a template for mindless destruction, but a canvas for exploring themes of fate, renewal, and the cost of cosmic balance. Even beyond direct references, Surtr's influence lingers in how fantasy frames its most devastating threats. The genre's obsession with world-ending villains, from Sauron to the Night King, owes a debt to Norse mythology's uncompromising vision of apocalypse. Before Surtr, most mythological destroyers were petty or personal. After him, fantasy understood the power of a threat that doesn't hate you, doesn't know you, but will erase you all the same. That shift transformed how we tell stories about annihilation, making room for villains who aren't villains at all, just natural disasters given form. What makes Surtr's legacy endure isn't just his spectacle, but his symbolism. Every flaming sword in fantasy, every empire toppled by elemental fury, carries a spark of Muspelheim's fire. He taught writers that true horror isn't in malice but in indifference, and that from that indifference, strangely, comes the possibility of rebirth. The next time you encounter a towering, flame-wreathed figure in your favorite fantasy epic, look closer. You might just see Surtr staring back. Surtr's flames don't just scorch the pages of ancient texts, they roar to life in the blistering chords of modern music, where his apocalyptic might has become a rallying cry for artists who thrive on intensity. Viking metal bands like Amon Amarth and Enslaved have turned his legend into sonic cataclysms, their songs a fusion of thundering drums, shredding guitars, and guttural vocals that mirror the fire giant's inexorable march. Take Amon Amarth's Destroyer of the Universe, where Surtr isn't just a subject but a presence, the lyrics painting him as a scourge of fire whose wrath shakes the foundations of the world. The music itself mirrors this devastation. Drop-tuned riffs crash like collapsing mountains, while the tempo shifts mimic the ebb and flow of battle, pulling listeners into the chaos of Ragnarök. But it's not just metal that channels Surtr's essence. Nordic folk groups like Wardruna weave his imagery into haunting acoustic arrangements, using traditional instruments like the Tegelharpa, a bowed lyre made from horsehair, to evoke the crackle of Muspelheim's fires. Their track Ragnarok doesn't just describe the end times, it conjures them through drones and throat singing, the sparse instrumentation leaving space for the listener's imagination to fill with visions of Surtr's advancing legions. This contrast between folk's primal minimalism and metal's overwhelming force reveals how versatile his myth remains, adaptable to any soundscape that craves themes of destruction and rebirth. Dig deeper and you'll find Surtr's influence in unexpected places. Black metal pioneers like Bathory and Immortal drew early inspiration from Norse mythology, but it's bands like Enslaved who have refined the connection, blending progressive rock complexity with mythic storytelling. Their album Below the Lights features As Fire Swept Clean the Earth, a track that doesn't just recount Surtr's role at Ragnarök, it reinterprets it as a psychological metaphor, the fire giant's flames representing inner turmoil and catharsis. The song's structure mirrors this duality, shifting from frenetic blast beats to melancholic melodies, as if mirroring the moment when destruction gives way to renewal. Even beyond Scandinavia, Surtr's archetype ignites creativity. Japanese metal band Whispered infused Norse themes with samurai aesthetics in blood-red shores of Inoshima, while German power metal outfits like Rebellion cast him as a quasi-historical conqueror. These diverse takes highlight something crucial. Surtr isn't just a Norse icon. He's a universal symbol of unstoppable change, a figure whose flames resonate with anyone who's felt the world crumbling around them. What binds these musical tributes together isn't just their subject matter, but their shared understanding of Surtr's emotional weight. The best renditions don't treat him as a mere monster. They channel the dread, awe, and strange solace embedded in his myth. When Amon Amarth's Johan Hegg growls, "The skies are burning," it's not just a lyric, it's an invocation, a way to confront the inevitability of endings head-on. And perhaps that's why Surtr endures in music, because art, like fire, has the power to destroy and renew, to terrify and inspire, all in the same breath. The next time you listen to a song about Surtr, pay attention to the spaces between the notes, the quiet moments before the storm. That's where the real magic lies, in the tension between fear and fascination, the same tension that's kept his legend alive for 1,000 years. Whether through folk's haunting whispers or metal's deafening roars, his fire still burns, undimmed by time. What if everything we think we know about Surtr is wrong? Beneath the familiar image of the fire giant as an unstoppable force of doom, some fans see hidden layers, echoes of a more complex being lost to time. One compelling theory suggests Surtr wasn't always a harbinger of destruction, but a fallen guardian whose flames once protected the cosmos. Imagine a time before Ragnarök, when Muspelheim's fire wasn't a threat but a barrier, holding back even greater horrors from the edges of creation. Ancient texts hint at this possibility. The Prose Edda mentions Surtr standing at Muspelheim's borders long before the final battle, his presence described not as aggressive but watchful. Could his sword, often depicted as a tool of annihilation, have originally been a seal, a lock meant to keep something far worse from slipping into the Nine Realms? Another radical interpretation paints Surtr as a corrupted deity, a former god of forge and craftsmanship twisted into an agent of ruin. Norse mythology is full of transformations, Loki's shifting allegiances, Odin's self-sacrifices for wisdom, so why not Surtr? Some point to his unnatural longevity, his existence predating even Ymir's birth as evidence of a forgotten origin. Artifacts like the Gosforth Cross, a 10th-century stone monument in England, show figures surrounded by flames without clear malice, fueling speculation that early Norse and Anglo-Saxon cultures might have viewed fire giants differently before Christianity's influence reframed them as purely destructive. Then there's the theory that Surtr isn't a singular being at all, but a title, a mantle passed down like a cursed torch. Viking sagas mention other fire giants, but none share Surtr's prominence or inevitability. Could Surtr be a role assumed by the mightiest of Muspelheim's rulers, each destined to wield the flaming sword when the cycle demands it? This would explain inconsistencies in his depictions across texts, where sometimes he's a mindless force and other times almost philosophical, as if different voices speak through the same fiery form. The most haunting fan theory reimagines Ragnarök not as Surtr's triumph but his failure. What if his fires were meant to cleanse the world of corruption, Loki's influence, Odin's manipulations, the god's sins, but the plan went awry, escalating into total annihilation? This mirrors themes in other mythologies like the Hindu Pralaya or Buddhist Kalpas, where destruction is meant to reset balance but sometimes overshoots. Imagine Surtr bound by ancient oaths, forced to burn everything when he only meant to scorch the rot away. These alternate takes reveal Surtr's fluidity as a symbol. To some, he's climate change incarnate; to others, a metaphor for revolution or even mental collapse. One Reddit thread dissected his parallels to the Phoenix, arguing that his flames aren't about ending the world but forcing evolution, a cosmic update for a stagnant universe. Another compared him to modern AI, an indifferent force wielding power beyond mortal comprehension. What unites these theories is their challenge to the binary of good and evil. Maybe Surtr isn't the villain of Norse myth, but its most tragic figure, a prisoner of fate, carrying out a duty no one else can bear. Or perhaps he's the ultimate radical, burning systems too entrenched to reform. Whatever the truth, his mystery lingers like smoke after a blaze, inviting us to look deeper. So what do you think? Could Surtr's story be more than ash and doom? Drop your wildest theories below. After all, myths grow richer when we dare to reinterpret them. Surtr's legacy isn't just a tale of annihilation. It's a mirror held up to the universe itself, reflecting the brutal truth that all things must end so new beginnings can take root. He isn't merely a monster lurking in the sagas. He's the embodiment of a principle the Vikings understood better than most. Destruction and creation are two sides of the same coin. Think of him as the cosmic wildfire, clearing away the old to make space for the new. The gods may wield lightning and wisdom, but Surtr wields something far more fundamental: the inevitability of change, the kind that doesn't ask permission or offer mercy. His flames aren't just tools of chaos, they're the reset button on a world grown stagnant, the force that ensures the cycle of existence keeps turning. This duality is what makes him so hauntingly compelling. Unlike Loki, whose schemes are driven by spite, or Thor, whose strength serves justice, Surtr operates beyond morality. He doesn't revel in the god's downfall, he simply carries out his purpose with the cold precision of a natural law. The Vikings didn't fear him because he was evil, they feared him because he was right. In a universe where even Odin's knowledge couldn't alter fate, Surtr stood as the ultimate reminder. No power, divine or mortal, lasts forever, and yet hidden in that grim truth is a strange comfort. After the fires of Ragnarök fade, the myths whisper of a world reborn, lush, green, and teeming with promise. Surtr's flames don't just erase, they renew. So what does that mean for us, centuries removed from the Viking Age? Surtr's myth endures because it speaks to something primal in the human experience. We all face our own personal Ragnaroks, moments when everything we've built seems to crumble, whether through loss, failure, or forces beyond our control. The lesson of Surtr isn't to despair in those moments, but to recognize them as part of a larger cycle. Just as the Vikings prepared for the end with defiance, we too can meet our flames head-on, knowing that even the most devastating trials can forge something stronger in their wake. Now it's your turn. When life's fires come for you, will you stand frozen in their glare, or will you rise from the embers ready to rebuild? The choice is yours. And if you're hungry for more tales of gods, giants, and the forces that shape our world, don't just watch from the sidelines. Join the journey. Hit like, subscribe, and let's keep unraveling the myths that still burn bright today. The next story is already waiting.